Hello, everybody. Welcome. On today's episode of Elitist Jerks, we'll be discussing RMT. If you've been playing MMORPGs for even a short amount of time, chances are you've heard or seen RMT. What is RMT? RMTs, for the purpose of this video, is referring to buying in-game currency through a third party or buying and selling of player accounts. Now, I want to be distinct in that I'm focusing on real money trading and not the general monetization that developers and publishers push into video games. Despite how that can be pretty predatory, that all deserves a separate episode of its own. So what does RMT mean for video games? There are all sorts of issues we can dive into about RMT and gaming. There are criminal elements such as stolen identity, bank accounts, or credit cards being used to launder money through purchasing in-game goods, selling those items to generate in-game currency, then selling that in-game currency for real money. There's the fact that creators of video games have gotten themselves into the market via premium currency, putting us in this messy position in the developer-publisher-customer relationship of creating problems and then selling solutions. There's the very real human tragedy that it is more lucrative. That the fact is, it is more lucrative in some countries to play video games, sell in-game proceeds, and that it is more favorable of a work situation than other more practical opportunities. These and many other issues with RMT deserve their own deep dive. What I want to focus on in today's episode is issues with developers changing fundamentals of their video games, the negative impact on the game's economy, and the addition of a dirty side of what is added to competition. Welcome to the RMT episode. Changing fundamentals of their game to combat RMT. Let's talk about some of the games that have fundamentals changed. Now, understand that there is definitely a way to interpret how these games are designed as simply the developers wanting to create their products in this very specific way as a desire that it is actually what they really want their game to be. I'm arguing that it isn't, that due to RMT and developers and publishers wanting to make as much money as they can possibly, that the games have been changed. And we, the customers or fans, are the ones that pay for it. That we have a less enjoyable time due to the limitations or design choices. Tree of Savior, limiting player-to-player trading as a mechanism to limit player trading, create item scarcity. That may not be the issue on its own, but additionally, at least at various times in the game's life, they made limits on trading on new accounts, I believe 7 days. For whatever reason, even if you were in a party and an item dropped, you could not trade it to a party member. It was, to me, one of the first games I played that made a separating situation, eliminating the feel of an MMO that I had gotten used to up until this point. BDO, Black Desert Online, is a game that has virtually no player-to-player trading. Everything that comes and goes into your player or account will have to go through the central marketplace. RMT still exists in BDO in the form of player account trading and piloting. Piloting is a workaround the inability to player trade, so instead players hire people to play on their accounts to gain in-game currency when they're at work, asleep, or otherwise themselves not playing. This also created kind of a weird atmosphere where people would argue about what was okay and not okay. Some players would advocate that there were streamers that logged into other people's account and that was okay. Or having your cousin or brother play your account, that was okay. But paying for that wasn't okay. It was a strange situation for me to personally see. World of Warcraft. Due to a common practice of power leveling players through running certain dungeons for players and charging them gold, something that so far seems perfectly fine in the MMO space, in the sense that that's just another economic opportunity within playing the game. Well, Blizzard adjusted the EXP rules for parties to combat some of this power leveling, citing that the gold generated from those providing the service in turn used the gold for illicit activities such as real money trading, claiming that money generated were in turn sold for real money back to other players. World of Warcraft also changes the behavior of dungeons in an attempt to curb gold generation methods in the game. They would change the way that you could get stunned by by monsters that were quote-unquote gray to you so that you couldn't mass farm these things, trying to curve your behavior of what is otherwise you playing within the confines of the game that, let's be honest, World of Warcraft has existed for 15 years, 20 years here, and now they're deciding, oh, these things need to be changed because somehow it's going to make a better product. Lost Ark. A less heavy-handed approach, there is player-to-player trading after a certain level, but developers will implement practices like this. To combat bots, new trading restrictions have been imposed, restrictions that may also affect human players. Players will now need to have a Steam account in good standing to access all of Lost Ark's trading features. It goes on to mention minimum purchase thresholds will have to be met. This is a free-to-play game, by the way. As I said, nothing too heavy-handed, but there are players out there that probably don't care to meet the minimum purchase threshold, and yet, if they want to do trading, they'll have to. Maybe not a big deal for you and I. We can spend a little bit of money or already have spent some money, but let's not forget, there are kids, grown adults, or just anyone really not wanting to spend money on the game. Free-to-play players, truly. But the developers are ready to restrict those players' abilities to engage in trading so that it can combat bots. Ragnarok Online Mobile. Yet another game that limits trading to only the auction house as a way to curve direct transactions to combat RMT. Virtually all the value of your character, whether it's selling or buying, will be tied to the auction house that has fixed pricing within a range. These and many more games have these and other changes and mindsets behind how the game is designed that usually adds up to an inconvenience or a fundamental change to what we've come to enjoy in MMOs as an attempt to combat RMT, bots, or other issues that the developers find problematic. Now, this might be a situation of damned if you do, damned if you don't. What exactly am I asking for by pointing out these changes and claiming that they're not for the best? To put it simply, in every single case I mentioned earlier, and virtually every other game, RMT is far from eliminated. All these games still have RMT issues, but at the end, all that's accomplished is warped MMORPG features. Players aren't allowed to player-to-player trade, or power leveling is disallowed, removing a layer of the social experience and ability to interact or help one another. One that I personally find takes a bit of the spark of MMORPGs away, not being able to help family or friends with an advantage that someone already enjoying the game can provide. It instead creates a situation where we feel sectioned off, we're modularized and unable to influence each other's areas. Kind of partitioned off, and your engagement with your friends feel more like a lobby-based game rather than an MMORPG. Also, it just so happens to be that most of these games as a service have their sanction method of turning your precious dollars into in-game currency. That's right, although some games released and had gacha pay to win as early as MapleStory, the latest wave of developers and publishers getting in on the action happened all around 2014. And once again, most of them combat RMT up to a limited point, to which they're pushing you towards their own shops, while never actually putting much of a dent in RMT. Impacting game economies. For many games, the unnatural amount of increased raw money supply in the game leads to inflation, especially games that lack viable gold sinks. A BIS item like this one, in New World, I last saw go for about 1 million to 1.5 million gold in New World. That's 2 to 3 times the maximum amount of gold a character can hold, for one item. Now, there are other issues on why New World has an absolutely insane economy, like their dupes, bots, lack of gold sinks, some taxes and territories creating money out of thin air. I'm looking at you, property taxes. And yeah, RMT is just another one of them. I'm willing to wager that RMT is the source or root issue for a lot of the motivation behind the others. In the case where player-to-player transactions is limited by the game itself, the impact to the economy is pretty plain and simple. The marketplaces normally have fixed pricing, and oftentimes there are all sorts of items that end up in the auction house way undervalued, overvalued, or useless altogether. Look, it isn't as if there is one simple solution to all of it, but somewhere along the lines of playing video games, things suddenly just became a lot more about money for the developers, or someone else making a buck, than actually enjoying a video game for the competition, sportsmanship, or accomplishment and glory. Dirty competition. So this is where I'll be weighing in a lot of my own bias. Admittedly, this is just my honest opinion on things. My honest opinion, I do feel like the onus is on the developers and publishers to create a functioning game. The integrity of its in-game economy is no different. It's part of it. It's part of that service and product. I feel for the cases in which it has the largest negative impacts, it's due to the indifference and lack of action by the admins. Look, I'm no video game saint. I've done my share of downloading an aimbot and Counter-Strike, selling video game accounts or items. I like to think that this is all just a part of researching for this eventuality, us making this episode someday. Now, if you can accept that and still accept that I do care about video games with a burning passion, that I want them to succeed. I want them to be fun and functioning. I want money to generally be something that you pay for the game, and that's the end of it. Knowing that, my thoughts are that environment, the atmosphere in which the players see around them, that greatly determines how they go about looking at RMT for themselves. If things are fairly clean, the community stays away from RMTing in general, the admins of the game prevent it from becoming normal or acceptable, then fewer players consider it. But if RMT is a rather normalized part of playing the game, the admins haven't done much or infrequently try to combat the practices, then well, I saw this both in BDO and one of the most recent MMORPGs, New World. New World being our latest and youngest example. And now remember, I ran a surprisingly competitive company up until about a month ago. It was clear to me that AGS didn't tackle the RMT gold buying in any tangible way. Players engaged with it with such a degree of normalcy and frequency and impunity that there was an atmosphere amongst especially the more competitive players that it was simply normal. And to be honest, who could blame them? Look at these rates. If you're not getting punished by the admins, and let's say $10 gets you 50,000 gold in New World, why would you farm gold the normal way to achieve the goals in game? It's sort of insane. Now, I get that some players have integrity, want to earn it themselves, but again, this is about atmosphere, your surroundings. You're not playing an MMO just on your own. Fewer and fewer will stick to being so pious while everyone else is running, to spend a fraction of their check to save them hundreds of hours. Let's not forget that developers have a direct stake in your money. They're looking for that disposable income to go their way. They're not exactly in the gaming business for altruism, nor are they combating RMT out of the goodness of their hearts. It might sound like I'm defending RMT. I'm not. I'm just being realistic in human nature and how I've witnessed things to play out. I'm advocating for the rules to be enforced. I'm arguing that lately developers and publishers aren't really doing much of any of that. Maybe they lack the tools, but I'm suspecting it's a bit more of something else.
So Evenson, then what is the solution?
Glad you asked.
It's simple. We kill the Batman.
I've already mentioned what seems to be the most successful situation for combating RMT. Unfortunately, like killing Batman, it actually isn't so simple. It is certainly something much easier said than done, but it's something that I think is worth the cost. Developers and publishers have a vested interest in the success of their games, and I believe it simply comes down to an issue of investing in their product and service. The quality of customer support or quality assurance has greatly diminished over the last several years from companies. World of Warcraft, believe it or not, used to offer a phone service with a live person that seemed to actually be familiar with the game. These days, companies like AGS might send you a copy and paste for New World, that is for Lost Ark instead. This was one of dozens, if not hundreds, of similar complaints that plagued New World forums and Reddits after Lost Ark had launched in NA. The problem went both ways. World of Warcraft's support isn't doing much better, though they're probably the best out of most of those in the gaming industry. It isn't abnormal to get customer support that isn't capable of doing much else but copying and pasting responses from scripts, or that simply aren't willing to handle appeals or tickets with some reasonable eyes and ears. This has spilled over recently in many service games and mass banning issues, or reporting issues. But let's not dive too deep into that right now and save that for another day.
Sometimes foreshadowing is relatively obvious.
Besides, we're going off on a tangent. We're here to talk about RMT. The point is that companies have become quite greedy lately. They're cutting costs everywhere they can, and it's showing. And part of that showing is in that their customer support has become very minimal. Just enough to keep everything from completely going down in flames, but really nothing that's producing the product and the service that we deserve. Look, I get it. Business got a business. But surely there is opportunity cost here, that these companies are being penny smart but dollar stupid. that they're losing customers and loyal fans by failing at protecting the integrity of the game. It isn't the sole reason for the decline of any of these games, but it certainly is speeding up the pace which any of these see a loss of interest. Bottom line is, when the game no longer feels fair, players either quit or do what they can to make things fair. I could go on, but I think we've made a few good points, or at least started the discussion. Shared some of my perspectives on real money trading, or RMT. It's certainly become a gray area lately between the lack of much needed resources from the developers and publishers, leading to normalizing its use, to the fact that developers and publishers themselves offer their own sanctioned pay to win. It's left us, the fans, in a pretty dire situation. If you're an MMORPG fan, chances are you've become conditioned to accepting it or questioning the developer's motive. Now let's be real, we're getting hit from both sides here. Gaming for many have become a function of what's better for their time, grinding in their beloved game or working their hourly wage. And that isn't what gaming should be about. I wish I could offer something of a solution on this particular situation, but it's just something us game enjoyers will simply have to go along the ride for. I'm hoping that in the future, gaming becomes a lot less about money and some works of passion really shine through. On that note, folks, I want to thank you for making it to the end here. Earnestly, I hope you enjoyed, and please take a moment to click the like button, subscribe, the real subscribe, and feel free to reach out in the comments, my Discord in the description. Your feedback, praise, criticism, ideas, suggestions, they're critical in helping me make a better experience for us all here at Elitist Jerks.